You're standing in a marble courtyard in Alexandria, and the screaming has stopped. The physicians emerge from the stone chamber, their hands stained not with blood, but with ink recording what they've just witnessed. A young man, convicted of theft, lies inside, still breathing, but no longer whole. His body has become a map. And in this moment, at the intersection of reason and brutality, you realize the pursuit of knowledge has no natural boundary. It only has the boundaries we refuse to cross, or the ones we justify crossing in the name of something greater. I'm genuinely curious. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching this from. It's incredible how a story from over 2,000 years ago can reach someone on the other side of the world, right now, in your hands. This is the 3rd century BCE. The Library of Alexandria stands as humanity's greatest cathedral to knowledge. Its scrolls containing everything from geometry to poetry. But in the medical schools nearby, a different kind of text is being written, one carved into living flesh. To Greek physicians, Aristotle and Erasistratus have received permission from the Ptolemaic rulers to do what was forbidden everywhere else in the civilized world, to open the human body while the heart still beats, not on the dead whose secrets had gone cold. On the living, on prisoners condemned to die anyway, the rulers reasoned. Why waste the opportunity? The Greeks had spent centuries debating the nature of the soul, the mechanics of thought, the essence of life itself. Plato believed the rational soul resided in the head. Aristotle placed the seat of consciousness in the heart. But these were theories, elegant and unproven, built on observation of the external and speculation about the internal. No one had looked inside a living human being and traced the pathways of sensation from finger to brain, watched the lungs expand with authentic breath, seen the intestines move with the rhythm of digestion, until Alexandria, until power met curiosity, and decided that some knowledge was worth the cost of mercy. Aristotle arrives at the palace with a request that would be recorded by historians for millennia. He doesn't ask for gold or land, he asks for access to the condemned, to those already marked for execution, and he frames his request in the language of philosophy. Is it not better that one guilty life contributes to the saving of thousands of innocent ones? The Ptolemaic court, Greek rulers in an Egyptian land, fashioned themselves as patrons of enlightenment. They had built the library. They had summoned scholars from across the Mediterranean. How could they refuse the physician who promised to unlock the greatest library of all the human body itself? The first subject is brought in shackled. The historical records don't preserve his name, only his crime, banditry. He knows he's going to die. What he doesn't know is that his death will be slow, methodical, and observed with the same careful attention a botanist gives to dissecting a flower. The room is not a dungeon. It's designed like a theater, with tiered stone seats for students and visiting scholars. At the center, a marble table with channels carved for drainage. Instruments are laid out with geometric precision. Bronze, scalpels, hooks, probes, clamps, and next to them, papyrus and ink. Aristotle believes something revolutionary, that the brain, not the heart, is the seat of intelligence. But belief is not knowledge, and knowledge requires evidence. So he makes the first incision along the scalp, peeling back skin and muscle to reveal the vault of the skull. He uses a specialized saw, one that would later be found in archaeological sites, its teeth designed to cut bone without shattering it. The prisoner is conscious. Some ancient sources suggest they used opium or mandrake to dull the pain, but the accounts are inconsistent. What is consistent is this: they needed the subjects alive, reactive, because a corpse couldn't show them what they needed to see. When Aristotle touches a particular spot on the exposed brain with a bronze probe, the prisoner's left hand twitches. He touches another spot, the right foot jerks. He's mapping the topography of control, discovering what wouldn't be formally understood until the 19th century, that specific regions of the brain govern specific parts of the body. He slices into the cerebellum and watches coordination collapse. He traces the optic nerve from eye to brain and discovers it's not a hollow tube carrying visual spirit, as previous theories claimed, but a solid pathway. Every observation is dictated to a scribe. Every assumption of classical philosophy is being tested against the unignorable reality of open flesh. But here's where the story turns strange. Aristotle doesn't see himself as a torturer. He sees himself as a servant of truth. He writes extensively about his findings, and his tone preserved in fragments quoted by later physicians is clinical, almost reverent. He describes the brain's ventricles as the seat of the soul's rational faculty. He names the structures he discovers, the calamus scriptorius. Even in the act of vivisection, he's reaching for poetry, for meaning, for a language that elevates what he's doing beyond butchery. Aristotle, his contemporary, takes a different approach. He's obsessed with the vascular system, the network of veins and arteries. Previous physicians believed veins carried blood, but arteries carried pneuma, a kind of vital air. Aristotle needs to see it happening in real time, so he opens the chest cavity of a living prisoner and watches the heart pump. He clamps arteries and observes what happens downstream. He discovers valve structures that ensure blood flows in only one direction. He traces vessels smaller and smaller, theorizing the existence of capillaries centuries before microscopes could confirm them. And he does all of this while a human being, still conscious on some level, experiences every moment of the invasion. The philosophical justification is meticulous. These are criminals, they argue, enemies of society. By Roman law and Greek custom, the state already owns their lives. Execution is certain. The only question is whether that death serves a purpose beyond punishment. Celsus, a Roman writer centuries later, would record the debate. Is it not cruel to torture individuals, even guilty ones? But then he provides the counter-argument, the one that won. Is it not more cruel to allow thousands of innocents to suffer and die from ignorance when knowledge could be extracted from those already condemned? This logic, utilitarian, cold, mathematically rational, is what makes the story so unsettling, because it's not the logic of madness, it's the logic of efficiency. It's the trolley problem rendered in bronze and blood. If you could save countless future lives by inflicting suffering on those already doomed, is refusing to act the moral choice or a failure of courage? Alexandria said yes to the experiment, and in doing so became the birthplace of anatomy as a systematic science and of a moral wound that still hasn't healed. The experiments continue for years, maybe decades. The historical record is fragmentary, pieced together from references in later texts, because Aristotle's own writings were lost when the Library of Alexandria burned. We know he performed vivisections on many prisoners, though the exact number is debated. Some ancient sources say hundreds, others suggest dozens. The discrepancy matters less than the pattern. This wasn't a single desperate act in a crisis. It was a program, institutional, sanctioned, methodical, and it produced results that shaped medicine for 1,000 years. Aristotle's discoveries about the brain and nerves were cited by Galen, whose medical texts would dominate European and Islamic medicine well into the Renaissance. Aristotle's work on the heart influenced the understanding of circulation. Even the techniques of dissection, they developed the careful separation of tissues, the preservation of structures, the use of probes and hooks became standard practice. When medieval physicians finally began dissecting human cadavers, they were, in a sense, following a protocol written in Ptolemaic Egypt on living subjects. But here's the question the sources don't answer clearly. Did it haunt them? Aristotle lived to old age, wealthy and honored. Aristotle became physician to kings. Neither was prosecuted, neither condemned by contemporaries. But in their writings, the fragments that survive, there's a curious absence. They describe anatomical structures in loving detail. They debate the nature of disease, the balance of humors, the function of organs, but they almost never mention the faces of the men they opened. No names, no crimes detailed. No moment where the physician's hand hesitates because the prisoner has begun to weep, or pray, or simply look at him with human eyes. Maybe that absence is itself a record of something unspeakable. The experiments end not because of moral outcry, but because of politics. When the Ptolemaic dynasty weakens, when Alexandria's influence wanes, when the cultural moment that made such things permissible shifts, the practice simply stops. Later, Greek and Roman physicians return to dissecting the dead. The knowledge remains embedded in medical texts, but the method is quietly abandoned. It's as if civilization collectively decided to forget how that knowledge was obtained, keeping the map but burning the memory of the journey. Celsus, writing centuries later, notes the disappearance of the practice with something like relief. Such experiments are no longer performed, he writes, and the knowledge gained is sufficient. But he also preserves the details, ensuring the story survives. Because even if the act was monstrous, the knowledge was real. And that's the paradox that Alexandria leaves us. Can truth be contaminated by the method of its discovery? If a fact is learned through suffering, does it carry that suffering in its DNA forever? Or does it transcend its origin and become just ... information? There's a fragment from Aristotle that survived in a quote by a later philosopher. He's reflecting on the nature of medical knowledge, and he writes, "Better to learn from the dead than to cause death through ignorance." It's often cited as a repudiation of vivisection, a late-life regret. But the grammar is ambiguous in the original Greek. Some scholars read it differently. Better to learn from the dying than to allow death through ignorance. A justification, not a confession. We'll never know which interpretation he intended, but the ambiguity itself feels almost deliberate, a man standing at the border between two meanings. Between healer and harmer, between knowledge and the price knowledge demands. The archaeological sites tell their own quiet story. In the ruins of Alexandria's medical quarter, excavators found bronze instruments of extraordinary sophistication. Bone saws with adjustable tension, scalpels with interchangeable blades, retractors designed to hold open, deep incisions. And nearby, in what may have been a teaching space, they found something else, a small lead tablet inscribed with a student's note. It reads, in terse Greek shorthand, Day 7, liver subject, expired 4th hour. Observations incomplete. No horror in the language, no moral weight, just the frustration of an experiment interrupted by death before data collection finished. That tablet sits now in a museum in Cairo, behind glass, part of an exhibit on ancient medicine. It's displayed next to illustrations of Aristotle's discoveries, the anatomical breakthroughs, the flowering of Greek science. The curators describe the vivisections in passive voice. Methods now considered unethical were employed. The language creates distance, as if the experiments performed themselves, as if no hands gripped the scalpel, no eyes met between physician and prisoner in the moment before the first cut. But history isn't made of passive voice. It's made of choices, and Alexandria chose knowledge over mercy, believing they'd found a formula where one guilty life could pay for 1,000 future cures. They weren't savages, they were philosophers. They built libraries and theaters and schools. They debated ethics and wrote poetry and calculated the circumference of the earth. And in the same breath, the same city, the same moment of intellectual flowering, they opened human beings alive to see what was inside. That's the part that should terrify us. Not that monsters did monstrous things, but that reasonable people, using reasonable arguments in the pursuit of genuine good, found a way to make horror sound like wisdom. The last recorded reference to the Alexandrian vivisections comes from Tertullian, a Christian theologian in the 3rd century CE, nearly 500 years after the practice ended. He's arguing against the dissection of human bodies entirely, even cadavers, and he calls Aristotle that butcher who cut up countless victims. His language is designed to shock, to repaint the physician as villain. But embedded in his polemic is a detail the earlier, more sympathetic sources don't mention. That some of the prisoners subjected to vivisection weren't condemned criminals at all, but prisoners of war, captured soldiers, men whose only crime was fighting for the wrong side. If true, and the evidence is contested, it means the experiment expanded. That the initial justification, they were going to die anyway, gave way to something broader, hungrier. That the project of knowledge, once sanctioned, found new subjects to feed itself. It's the same pattern that would repeat through history. A boundary crossed in the name of necessity becomes, over time, just another space to occupy. The exception becomes precedent. The emergency becomes procedure. The Greeks had a word for this kind of moral slippage. Akrasia, knowing the right thing, but doing the wrong one anyway. Not out of ignorance, but despite knowledge, Socrates believed akrasia was impossible, that to truly know the good was to do it. But Aristotle and Aristotle stand as a rebuttal carved in flesh. They knew what suffering was. They could hear it, and they chose knowledge anyway, believing history would vindicate them. And in a sense, it did. Their names are in medical textbooks. Their discoveries saved lives. The anatomy they mapped became the foundation of surgery, of neurology, of every medical intervention that requires understanding what's beneath the skin. When a surgeon today removes a brain tumor without severing the optic nerve, they're benefiting from a map first drawn by Aristotle. When a cardiologist traces blockage through an artery, they're following paths Aristotle explored. Does that vindication erase the screaming? Or does the screaming echo in every life saved, unheard but present, the way a foundation supports a building invisibly. There's no clean answer, just the historical record, fragmentary and contested. Just the bronze instruments in museum cases, just the knowledge that remains orphaned from its origin story, and the origin story that survived despite attempts to forget it. Aristotle died wealthy, in his bed, surrounded by students who revered him. History recorded his contributions. And history also recorded what those contributions cost. Both facts sit beside each other, uncomfortably, refusing to resolve into a simple lesson. You see a marble courtyard in Alexandria, centuries after the last vivisection. The buildings are ruins now, the library long burned, the medical schools abandoned. But somewhere in the rubble, if you dig deep enough, you might find a stain on stone that no amount of time has completely erased. Not blood that washes away, but the outline of a question that was answered once, in the most terrible way possible, and has been asked again and again ever since. What is the human body worth when weighed against human knowledge? And who gets to decide? The wind moves through the empty courtyard, and the question remains, carved into the foundation of every medical breakthrough since. Unacknowledged but undeniable. How much of what we know was learned from someone's suffering? And how much more are we willing to forget so long as the knowledge remains useful? The Greeks believed in hubris, the pride that makes you think you can transcend human limits without paying human costs. They wrote tragedies about it. They staged them in theaters like the one where Aristotle once taught. Audiences gasping as characters learned too late that knowledge without wisdom is just another form of blindness. But here's the irony. They couldn't have foreseen. The tragedy was never staged. It was real, and it played to an audience that took notes.